Have you ever been called intimidating when you were simply being honest? Or labeled too much just because you knew your worth? Let me tell you something. It's not a flaw. It's a signal. A signal that you might just have a stronger personality than you think. There is a quiet kind of power in not needing applause, in walking into a room and not scanning for approval, but instead carrying your own sense of value with you, like a second skin. It's not arrogance, it's not defiance, it's certainty. A certainty that who you are, what you think, and how you feel do not need to be filtered to earn someone else's comfort or consent. When you have a strong personality, you begin to realize that external praise, while pleasant, is not essential. You stop measuring your worth in compliments or consensus. You stop tailoring yourself to what others expect just to avoid discomfort. You start choosing peace over people-pleasing, and more importantly, you start listening, not to the noise of the crowd, but to your own inner compass. This kind of self-assurance is often misunderstood. It gets mistaken for aloofness, for pride, even for rebellion. But the truth is far more subtle. It's about no longer needing permission to be who you already are. It's about waking up and choosing to live in alignment with your values, not someone else's idea of who you should be. You don't dress to impress. You dress to express. You don't wait for someone to nod before you speak your mind. You say what needs to be said, even if your voice is the only one echoing in the silence. You don't seek out the spotlight, but you won't shrink to fit into someone else's shadow either. What people often overlook is how liberating it is to no longer chase approval, to no longer ask, "Do they like me?" and instead wonder, "Do I like who I am becoming?" Because the need for validation is exhausting. It turns identity into performance, and eventually, you realize that being deeply known by a few for who you truly are is infinitely more fulfilling than being liked by many for a version of you that isn't real. You begin to choose honesty over harmony, depth over decoration, and growth over gratification. You stop shrinking when someone's discomfort tries to redefine your confidence as confrontation. You stop apologizing for being sure of yourself. You understand that real connection doesn't require you to audition for love or tiptoe for acceptance. Setting boundaries is often misunderstood. People see it as distance, as coldness, as rejection. But in truth, it's an act of profound clarity. When you have a strong personality, you begin to understand that boundaries are not walls. They are lines of self-respect. They are how you say to the world, "This is what I will allow. This is what I will not." And you don't say it harshly. You don't shout it to provoke. You simply embody it in how you choose your relationships, in how you spend your time, in the things you tolerate and the ones you no longer do. You stop justifying your limits. You stop cushioning your no with unnecessary guilt. You begin to understand that honoring your own needs is not selfish. It is survival. It is self-preservation. It is sanity. You no longer entertain situations that drain you just to avoid disappointing someone else. You no longer make yourself small so others can feel more comfortable. You recognize that if someone's love depends on your silence, your compliance, or your exhaustion, then it was never really love to begin with, just control disguised as affection. You become fluent in discomfort, not because you seek it, but because you know that setting boundaries often means being misunderstood, and you're willing to be misunderstood if it means being true to yourself. You learn that you don't owe anyone unlimited access to your time, your energy, or your emotional availability simply because they expect it. You can be kind and still say no. You can care deeply and still choose distance. You can love people and still decide that certain behaviors, words, or patterns have no place in your life. You no longer measure your worth by how much you endure for the sake of keeping the peace. You stop equating self-sacrifice with goodness. You understand that self-abandonment is not noble. It's a slow erosion of your spirit. And every time you say yes to something that violates your sense of peace, just to avoid conflict, you chip away at the trust you have in yourself. So you begin to make different choices. You begin to guard your time like the finite, precious resource it is. You give your energy more mindfully, more intentionally. You listen to your intuition, especially when it tells you that something isn't right, even if you can't yet explain why. You no longer feel the need to prove your boundaries, to explain them, to soften them with apologies. They exist because you do, and because you've realized that a strong personality doesn't thrive in chaos. It creates calm by being clear. There is a rare kind of courage in being alone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally. A strong personality doesn't fear solitude. In fact, it often seeks it. Not to escape the world, but to reconnect with the self. Because when you stop depending on noise, on distraction, on constant company to feel whole, something powerful happens. You begin to hear your own voice more clearly than ever before. You don't fill your calendar out of panic. You don't chase connection just to escape silence. You've learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. One is presence with self, the other is absence of connection. And you've come to recognize the difference. You know that solitude isn't a void. It's a sanctuary, a space where clarity arrives uninvited, where your own thoughts aren't interrupted by comparison or clouded by the need to be accepted. When you're comfortable being alone, you stop reaching for relationships just to feel needed. You stop tolerating half-hearted friendships, one-sided conversations, and forced connections that deplete more than they nourish. You choose stillness over settling. You choose peace over presence. You start to refine the kind of energy you allow into your world because you're no longer desperate to fill the space. You become selective, not because you're arrogant, but because you've tasted solitude, and you know how valuable your time and inner calm truly are. You've sat with your own pain, your dreams, your doubts. You've made peace with the fact that not everyone will understand you, and you've stopped waiting for others to complete you, because you already feel complete when you're alone with yourself. In your solitude, you've learned to be honest, brutally, beautifully honest, about what you want, what you need, what no longer fits. You're no longer distracted by the opinions of people who were never meant to shape your story. You're not afraid of empty rooms because you carry your own company with depth. You've built a relationship with your inner world so strong that no one else's absence can shake it. You understand that being alone is not a state to be fixed, but a state to be valued. Because in the quiet, you've uncovered truths about yourself that noise could never reveal. And in that stillness, you've discovered that your worth was never meant to be defined by anyone else's nearness, only by your own. There is a distinct kind of strength in using your voice, not when it's easy, not when the room agrees with you, but when your truth risks making the room fall silent. A strong personality doesn't speak for attention, it speaks from principle. And often, it speaks when it would be far more convenient to remain quiet. Speaking up when it's uncomfortable is not about argument or dominance. It's about integrity. It's about choosing honesty over harmony, even when your voice shakes. It's about stepping into conversations where silence would protect you, and choosing to risk being misunderstood rather than betraying what you know to be right. You learn early on that truth is not always well received. That standing firm in your perspective might cause tension, distance, or disapproval, but still, you choose it. Because authenticity has become more valuable to you than popularity. You've grown tired of diluting yourself just to be liked, of editing your convictions to avoid conflict. So instead of censoring your thoughts to keep the peace, you start practicing the kind of peace that only honesty can bring. You don't raise your voice to overpower, you use it to illuminate. You choose your words carefully, but never fearfully. You challenge assumptions, question norms, and call out injustice, not to be rebellious, but because your silence would feel like complicity, and your soul is no longer willing to trade comfort for compliance. You speak up in boardrooms where you're the only dissenting voice. You raise your hand in classrooms when others look away. You step into difficult conversations with people you care about, knowing that love is not weakened by truth, it's made more real by it. You ask the hard questions. You challenge the convenient answers. You understand that discomfort is often the first step toward change, and you are no longer afraid of the awkward silence that follows a necessary truth. You've come to understand that silence is not always neutral, that in many moments, Staying quiet is not a mark of grace. It's a surrender of your responsibility, and you've outgrown the version of yourself that bit her tongue to avoid being seen as too intense, too passionate, or too much. You know now that your voice, steady, deliberate, imperfect, carries weight, and that using it is not a disruption, but a form of devotion to what matters most. You don't need a crowd to back you. You don't need consensus to feel credible. Your courage doesn't come from knowing you'll be praised. It comes from knowing that staying silent would cost you more than anyone's approval ever could. In a world that moves faster by the hour, where opinions shift like wind and attention spans shrink like daylight in winter, there is something quietly radical about not chasing what's popular. A strong personality doesn't need to be told what to think, how to dress, who to follow, or what to believe. Instead of borrowing their identity from the latest wave, they build it slowly, intentionally, from a foundation of values that don't expire with the season. Trends may offer belonging, but convictions offer direction. And when you're grounded in conviction, you start making choices not because they're fashionable, but because they are aligned. Aligned with your inner compass, with your beliefs, with your understanding of what is good, right, and true. You're not swayed by numbers or noise. You can admire without imitating, observe without absorbing, exist without needing to match the energy of the crowd. This often sets you apart. You might walk left when everyone else turns right. You might hold firm when others fold. It doesn't mean you're trying to be different for the sake of it. It means you simply know who you are. And that knowledge makes it hard, sometimes impossible, to follow something just because it's trending. You look at things more deeply. You ask questions when others settle for answers. You investigate what lies underneath the shiny surface of popular culture and ask, what is this really saying? You don't just want to fit in. You want to belong to something that matters. You don't repeat slogans without understanding their origin. You don't support movements just for visibility. You need substance. You need meaning. And if something doesn't sit right with your conscience, no amount of social pressure will force you to adopt it. It's not that you're closed-minded, quite the opposite. You are open, curious, aware, but also rooted. You've learned how to update your thinking without abandoning your core. You listen, but you don't sway with every whisper. You evolve, but you don't mutate just to avoid standing alone. And while the world might often try to convince you that relevance is the same as truth, you know better. You know that what's right isn't always loud, and what's trending isn't always wise. There is strength in restraint, in watching the world change while staying steady within yourself. It takes courage to say, no, this isn't for me, even when everyone else seems to be clapping for it. It takes discipline to resist the pull of instant approval and short-lived validation. You're not interested in appearing correct. You're interested in being correct, and that requires discernment, patience, and often solitude. You don't perform. You live with intention. Your choices aren't filtered through popularity. They're shaped by principle, whether it's the causes you support, the conversations you engage in, or the life you're building. Everything is guided by something deeper than trend, your truth. When you have a strong personality, you often stand out, not because you're trying to, but because you can't help but be unapologetically real in a world that often rewards performance over authenticity. You don't mold yourself to fit in. You don't shift your personality depending on who walks into the room. You remain steady, grounded, consistent, and while that may not make you the most popular person in every crowd, it draws something far more meaningful: loyalty. You're not interested in surface-level approval. You don't chase the spotlight. You don't crave constant recognition, and you certainly don't adjust your truth just to earn applause. You don't say what people want to hear. You say what's real, even when it's difficult. And that kind of honesty, that unwavering consistency, isn't always adored by the masses, but it's deeply respected by the few who see you for who you truly are. Popularity is loud. It's fickle. It's often built on illusion, on being liked rather than being known. But you've never been interested in curating a version of yourself to appeal to everyone. You understand that trying to please the crowd will only leave you diluted, disconnected, and exhausted. So instead, you choose something quieter, something slower, something real. You build relationships with depth. You create connections rooted in trust, in sincerity, in mutual respect. And as a result, the people you attract aren't just drawn to your image, they're drawn to your integrity. They're not here for the performance, they're here for the person. The ones who stay not because it's trendy, not because you make them feel entertained, but because they feel safe, challenged, inspired, and seen in your presence. You don't offer convenience, you offer truth, and that truth may not be for everyone. In fact, it rarely is. Some will misunderstand you, some will find your strength intimidating, your honesty uncomfortable, your boundaries inconvenient, but the ones who remain, the ones who return, who stand beside you without needing to be asked, those are the ones you build your world around. Your loyalty to yourself teaches others how to be loyal to you. Because when people know that you're not pretending, not performing, not wearing a mask, they know they can trust you. Not to always tell them what they want to hear, but to always be someone who shows up with consistency and truth. That kind of presence builds something deeper than popularity ever could. You're not surrounded by a crowd, but by a circle of people who don't just admire your strength. They respect your depth. They know your silence means something. They trust your words carry weight. And while you may not be universally adored, you are deeply valued by those who matter, because they see something in you that doesn't flicker under pressure, something that doesn't need to perform to earn space, something they can count on, something rare. Having a strong personality isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about knowing who you are when the room falls silent. So if any part of you resonated with these signs, stop second-guessing your strength. You're not too much. You're just enough, in all the right ways, and the world needs more of that.